Welcome, everyone. My name is Cindy, and I'm the president and CEO of The Good Partnership. And you're joining us for our monthly masterclass this week, or this month. We're talking about habits. And I am beyond happy to introduce you to our guest, Aine McGlynn. Aine is the newest member of The Good Partnership. She's our COO. And I'm just delighted because she's a powerhouse and incredible and a little bit nerdy like me. And so we're having a lot of fun, and we want to have that fun with you as well. So welcome, everyone. Aine, do you want to do a little quick intro of your background?
Yeah, sure. So thanks everyone for joining today. I'm looking forward to this chat. As Cindy mentioned, it should definitely be a discussion and not a lecture. Speaking of lecturing, my background is in sort of academia. I went the whole, PhD, advanced studies route, and thought I'd be wearing leather patches on my elbows for the rest of my life and smoking a pipe thoughtfully looking off into the distance, but didn't pan out that way. And turns out that when a career in academia actually translates quite well into the social sector. So there's still a lot of analysis and writing and communicating and convincing and turning complex ideas into simple things that people will understand. So I was really happy to make the shift into nonprofit almost 10 years ago now. So
can I just say, most academics don't always make that translation from complex to simple. That's a unique skill set too, I think.
Yeah, it's true. Maybe that's born out of necessity rather than a truism across the field. But yeah. So after 8 to 10 years working in development for organizations, mostly on the smaller side, I'm really excited to be working, I guess, adjacent to the nonprofit sector in the sense that we're a socially innovative organization, but we're not a strictly speaking a nonprofit, but feeling like I can still get to support a lot of organizations through the work that we do. And yeah, like as Cindy mentioned, just kind of a nerd interested in new ideas and applying new concepts, particularly from behavioral psychology. I find that really interesting, and thinking about how we can apply them both to our work in fundraising in the nonprofit sector, and also to thinking specifically about how our donors think and work, and getting a little bit crafty and maybe leveraging some of those behavioral psychology learnings to fundraise better.
Awesome. So today we're going to either divide or sort of weave in and out between two discussions around behavior and habits in particular. So the first is our habits, right? How are we as professionals building quote unquote good habits around productivity and fundraising, and just making sure that we are productive and not burning ourselves out and working smart. But then of course there's our donors' habits too, which is how do we take our understanding of creating habits and actually apply that to fundraise more effectively. Mm-hmm. So I thought we could actually start with what is your worst work habit? Just in the chat, let us know, where do you sort of kick yourself? You're like, oh, I can't believe I just did that again. I'd love to hear, because we all have bad habits and good habits, right? And maybe while people are letting us know, I can tell you mine is context switching, like going between too many, or multitasking.
Heather's agreeing there.
Heather, you too. And I've been really working on that. But while procrastination is another I used to be more guilty of that, not so much anymore, as my colleagues would probably attest. I have the opposite. I try to do too much all the time, and I don't stop, and I don't take enough breaks. Not documenting your process. How good is that, Anya? That's like what we exist to do.
Yeah. That one, I actually sort of err on the other side of that. I think I sometimes spend too much time documenting and getting like diving too deep into something, as opposed to just being like, you know what, it's good enough. Let's move on. And so sometimes focusing on process too much.
Yeah. Part of why I hired Anya is because we need to document processes in our business and our client, like processes that we can help our clients implement. So, because I've seen that, and I think you'd agree, like this is a chronic, all of these things are chronic issues in our sector and probably in other sectors too.
Absolutely.
But loss of information, especially when things aren't documented, is huge.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So tell us a little bit, Anya, about habits and how we form them.
Yeah. So I'm for my comments today, I'm relying a lot on two particular texts. Thinking Fast and Slow, which you may have read, came out in 2012, and also The Power of Habit. I don't know if you can see that cover. Charles Duhigg also came out in 2012. So just sort of quick show of hands, heard of it, read either one of them?
I haven't.
Okay, you haven't. Okay. So if you have, like, apologies, there's going to be some repetition, but if,
before we go into that, reading is a habit too.
True, but podcasts, there's audio, there's audiobooks.
It was, since I had kids, I was so bad at picking up books. So I've, as you know, resorted to audiobooks because I so believe that it's important to read like this. And it's just one of those things that I feel like I never have time for or never prioritize, probably more accurately. But anyway.
Yeah, well, so maybe, Cindy, we can talk about how we can get reading back into some of your habits. I mean, time is always a limitation, and there's nothing you can really do about that. You can't invent more hours in the day, and you have to prioritize. But maybe, just maybe, we can get you get reading into your habits. So
you're gonna have to swap out Netflix at night.
Maybe. So the way that habits work. So Duhigg, he bases his research on a lot of academic studies, so both sort of from neurobiology and neuroscience, and also like psychology and behavioral psychology in particular. So when he starts off, he starts really looking at, like, why do we have habits? How do they take place? And what purpose do they serve? So habits are really, they're created by repetition, right? So you do the same thing over and over again, and they're reinforced by craving. So the repetition happens, but like that, you're encouraged to keep repeating based on cravings. And usually that craving is around a reward. Okay, so if we think very, very simply about, a standard sort of lab experiment with, a mouse and a maze and a piece of cheese, the mouse can be trained to go and find the piece of cheese through the maze, so that even when they take away the piece of cheese, he still has the habit of moving that way in that maze, right? So he's repeating the action over and over and over again, and so you create this habit loop where the cue is the lifting of the little door that opens up the maze to him. The routine is the movement through the maze, and the reward is the piece of cheese. So that's really important to remember as we think about habits, is the three parts of that habit loop: the cue, the routine, and the reward. So for example, like you probably have some, if you think about it, you have some habits that you currently engage in that you can identify those three distinct parts. And
they forms like that because our brains are lazy, right?
That's absolutely right. So, well, it's not necessarily that they're lazy, but it's actually
super smart, I should say.
Yeah, no, because it's not really about laziness. It serves a really critical biological function. It basically, a habit neurologically allows your brain to go to sleep. So so your brain can basically work on autopilot, and save energy, so it becomes very efficient. And as we know about sort of human biology, there was a big struggle and at one evolutionary point with the size of our heads, right? And when our heads were too big because our brains were too big, it made childbirth very difficult, and so there was actually sort of an evolutionary threat to the species. So the more that the brain could act efficiently, the smaller it could be, and therefore you could actually ensure the survival of the species even better. I mean, that's sort of evolutionary theory, like super light. I hope nobody can really check my reference on that, but I'm pretty sure that it's pretty much that. So basically, like if you look at the neurological patterns when somebody is being examined as they're going through their habit loop, you'll see that the neurological activity just goes right down. So even when we're doing really, really complex things. So for example, like, you know, when you back out of the driveway in the morning, is it this way? Wait, which, am I in England or am I here? So you're backing out of the driveway, you know, you've got a kid in the front seat talking to you, you've got the radio going, and yet you manage to be able to like back out of a driveway into a busy street, you know, applying distinct, you know, pressure of brake and acceleration, looking in the mirrors, calculating your angles, also telling your kid to be quiet and changing the radio station all at the same time. The fact that you can perform that quite complex act is because of this reinforcement, and that essentially your brain doesn't have to think about what it's doing. So this paper published in 2006 by Duke actually said that 40% of the actions that we take in the day are habits. So they're not mindful decisions. They're things that we do without even knowing that we're doing it. Like have any of you ever been leaving work, heading towards the TTC, or your transit or your car or whatever, you know that you have to go someplace that's not home after work. And you get onto the train or you get into the car, and 10 minutes into your journey, you're like, oh my God, I'm on my way home. I'm not on my way to where I should go. That's because you've gotten into this routine loop that, you know, that is reinforced by repetition and reinforced, frankly, by that craving to be home. And so it takes that mindfulness, that moment of like stopping, turning on your brain, in order to create a disruption to that process.
But that's really hopeful, right? Because the more we can create really good and productive habits, the less work our brain will do. So it'll be easier to do those things, but also it frees up that brain space to do the things that have the most added value, right? Like I love that. And so the more we can create good habits, we won't be as burnt out. We won't be as hectic. Our brains won't feel as mushy.
That's right.
And then we can use that brain power for the things for the times that we really need it.
Yeah, that's right. And the interesting thing is that, so in terms of creating new habits, your old habits don't actually ever go away. So, you know, this is why like AA is one of the classic examples of an organization that's understood how this habit loop works, and actively works to change it. But AA acknowledges, which is why people, when they go to an AA meeting, they're after 40 years of going to AA meetings and never having a drink, they still say, my name is John and I'm an alcoholic. Because that recognizes the fact that those neural pathways that are created by habits, which is to say like the ways that the little cells in your brain connect to each other through electrical impulse, those pathways are always there. They never disappear. But what happens is that when you create new pathways, those original pathways become, you know, very, very much sort of overgrown, right? So interesting. So Sarah's asking if we're going to be talking about fundraising, which, you know, fair question. So this leads to the conversation about like, what are the habits that you use as a fundraiser, and you know, where could you possibly intervene in some of those habit routines to create new, more effective routines? And then the other question is around when you think about your donors and their habits around donations, how can you intervene along that habit loop to actually generate more revenue for your organization. Yeah.
So let's talk about some good fundraising habits, because I'm a firm believer that good fundraising more than anything is consistency, and consistency is habits, right? It's the same thing. So what are some habits that we can practice so that they become easier and easier for our brains, so that our fundraising can be more successful as workers, so not the donor facing
stuff. Yeah, so I think that's a good point around process, right? So if you define for yourself, if you basically do what the brain does and chunk activities, and get into the habit of performing those same activities over and over again. And apparently it only takes about 21 days to create a new habit, but you have to be mindful about it for 21 days. And after 21 days, that's when you see that kind of automation takes over. But for 21 days, you have to be like, okay, the first thing I do today is going to be, I'm going to turn off my email notifications. I'm going to look at this list of 50 people that I have in front of me. I'm going to call each one of them, and spend 5 minutes on the phone with them.
Yeah.
Right. And then get
into
that.
Who does that now? So we know, right? First of all, in the chat, let us know. Do you know that picking up the phone or sending a personal email or meeting with your donors is sort of quote unquote good fundraising practice? You know that helps you raise money. Yes or no? Let us know. Yeah. Right. So those are all things. How much time do you create each day to do that? Or each week? I'll give you each week because that's fair.
Yeah, and it's I'm glad that you've asked the question, and it's coming back like not enough time, and it's the same thing, right? Like I know that I would be a healthier, happier person if I exercise more. I know that.
Yeah.
How much time do I spend on it every week? Not enough. But I know that if I create the right kind of habit loop, which is to say, if I work on making the cue stronger that makes me go for a run, and making the reward stronger that happens afterwards, that I'll create this new habit around running. So if I can sort of paint a little picture, I use an example that Duhigg uses in the book. Toothbrushing was not a common thing that people did every day. It wasn't. Like at the start of the 20th century, basically, like it was a public health crisis. People's teeth were falling out, and like they were getting these gum infections, and they were leading to like jaw problems. Like it was really bad. And it's not that there wasn't toothpaste out there. It's not that there wasn't toothbrush. And it wasn't that the public health departments weren't spending massive amounts of money trying to advertise and encourage people to brush their teeth. People just wouldn't do it. So this guy came along, and he was working with Pepsodent. And he discovered that Pepsodent's toothpaste was a little bit different. In their ingredients, they had both citric acid and mint. And the combination of citric acid and mint created this foam, completely unintentional, and this kind of like tingling feeling in the mouth, right? Which none of the other toothpastes on the markets have had. For example, if anybody's ever used Tom's Natural toothpaste, you'll notice that it doesn't really foam, and you don't really get that tingling sensation. So that tingling sensation and that foam, completely accidental. But what it did is that it provided the person who's brushing their teeth this really visceral feeling of cleanliness, this tingling sort of feeling. So the marketer who was working with Pepsodent goes, well, so what we do is we create this notion of, run your tongue over your teeth. You feel that film? You use our product, and the reward will be this tingling, foaming sensation. And it was gangbusters. People started brushing their teeth, and like the whole North America had a brand new habit, right? And so much so, like the reward of foam was so powerful to our little human brains that laundry detergent and soap makers started putting foaming agents in their products, because otherwise they wouldn't actually have that effect, and you wouldn't have that feeling of cleanliness, right? So in developing these habits around fundraising, like what is the reward that you need to put in place for yourself in order to reinforce that routine, right? So the cue might be, even honestly, if you set a little, set a timer on your phone to go off when you want to do your donor calls, your donor emails. So that's your cue, right? That's the door has opened for the mouse, right? And now you go through the maze, you make your calls, and at the end, define what it is that you're going to do for yourself. So maybe you're going to spend half an hour on social media. Maybe you're going to go and you go for a nice walk around the block. Maybe you're going to get up and give yourself a coffee. But like, if you create that sort of rigidity and you're mindful about it for 21 days, by the 22nd day, it'll just be like, you won't even need the cue or the reward because you'll have created the routine around the habit.
One of the things that's worked for me really well in the past is having accountability buddies. So, and especially in fundraising. So obviously the reward of like actually raising money is pretty strong.
Sure, but that's
it's
like,
those
it's
like
not
little,
always it doesn't always
like,
happen.
It's little ones. Like on our team, we meet every day virtually for just like 15 minutes, but to have people who you could like even high five and say like, I did it this week, we got it done. So we work in these sprints, and it's really important to like check off our list of what we've accomplished and share that with each other, not just on our own, but having people you can celebrate with, and the little wins, I think go a long way. And I think Heather mentioned in her comment, like pick only 2 or 3 a week. Yeah, don't, I've heard don't boil the ocean or different ways of talking about it. Pick small things that you can complete and celebrate that completion. So break up these really big, overwhelming tasks into smaller things that can be accomplished in the course of a day or a week or however long you set that habit for.
Absolutely. And that's what Duhigg would call a keystone habit. So it's the one thing that you choose to focus on that will actually lead to like a whole cascading set of different changes. So for example, if you decide that you're going to get in shape for the summer, it's like Cindy mentioned, it's boiling the ocean, it's too big. If you decide I'm only going to eat meat once a week, right? That will mean that you will buy more vegetables. That will mean that you will look up different kinds of recipes. That will mean that you will learn to cook in different kind of ways. That will mean that you'll develop different flavor profiles. So it's like by choosing just one very, very concrete specific thing, you actually create this sort of ripple effect of all of these different behaviors that start to accompany that what is actually the larger goal, but you've just chosen one thing that you know is going to lead to the larger goal of I want to be in shape or I want to be more healthy or whatever. So those keystone habits are key to identify.
And so I have a challenge for people before we start talking about our donors' habits, because I think it's really easy in small organizations to get pulled into so many different directions, and our best intentions go to the wayside. So the challenge is pick one habit you want to develop or change. Just one right now. Don't think about changing your whole life or your whole organization, because that is just, you won't get the rewards. Pick one thing, whether it's thank you calls or meeting with donors, or even like developing stories, right? Stories are really important to fundraising. So meeting with program staff and doing one story a month or something like that. Pick one thing.
Yep.
And write out, you can even email us and write out what your cue is and what the reward is, and stick with it for a month.
Yep.
And see how it goes. And don't beat yourself up if you miss a day or two. So I tried meditating and I've fallen off the bandwagon with that one too, but I'm going to get back on it.
Yeah.
But meditation is this like, you always think that you have to do it perfectly, or at least I do. It's like, and it never really felt right, but I forgave myself for not doing it perfectly. Mm-hmm. And then because there's the positive reward, but there's also this negative thing that we want to avoid if we don't do it right. Mm-hmm. And so as much as you give yourself a reward, make the negative way less negative, right? Like, it's okay if it's not perfect. It's okay if you miss a day. Just get back on it the next day. Does that
Yeah.
make sense? Can you guys do that? Let us know in the chat. Just one commitment. We started implementing a lot of new practices over the past little while to help our productivity as a team, and it's really helped, and we're definitely not perfect, but even the incremental increase, and it gets easier every day. So yeah.
Totally.
All right, so how can we then take this idea and, I'm going to say in a tongue-in-cheek way, manipulate our donors' experience?
Yeah.
You guys know I'm joking.
Well, yeah, no, I mean, yeah, like if, it's tricky to use the right kinds of words in this regard, but look, we all are in the industry, and we know that the goal is really to get people to give money to the cause that you're working on. So, first, I guess I'd like to hear what people think goes into somebody's decision to donate, and whether or not you consider that donors have habits around donation.
I'll start while people are typing, but guys, let us know what insights you have about your own donors. I remember, well, actually with one of the clients we're working with right now, I think a habit of the donors is that trigger response, right? Like, we know this of the boomers and older generations, is their habit is they get a direct appeal in the mail and they write a check. That is habitual more than it is a cognitive decision.
Yep.
So I don't know, guys, let us know. Don't be shy. We know that about that generation, right?
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. So, like, I think, we know that there are, so for example, people again are creatures of habit. If they have been donating for one organization for a long time, they're probably going to continue to donate to that organization in the same way that people tend to buy the same brand of toothpaste and the same brand of milk. And it's not that the other ones aren't good. It's just that, like, that's where your hand goes, that's where your eye goes, right? Turning that brain off, becoming, using your neurological energy efficiently.
Yeah.
So in the same way, I think that donors sometimes have habits about that. But what's interesting is that there are strategic moments that you should know about that actually are the best moments to try and change somebody's habits. So usually that's around major life changes. Right? So a kid goes to school, a kid goes to university, somebody gets married, somebody buys a house, somebody gets a new job, somebody moves to a new city. Like, so all of those major life events create these kind of like neurological spikes where basically all of your habits are thrown off because you're adapting to this new normal, right? So you're very susceptible to trying new things, to learning new things, to exploring new ideas, and to donating to organizations that you wouldn't necessarily have known about in the past. So then the question becomes, well, how do I know if my donor is about to get married, or if they just had a kid, or if their kid just went off to university or just moved out of the house or whatever? And that's where data comes into play, right? That's a whole other conversation. But, I'm sure that there's some of you who know your donors quite well. And you do know that what age their kids are. You do have a sense that they're thinking about retirement, right? And those are the moments to kind of push that conversation a little bit further, I would say.
That's so interesting. I never thought of that. But now that I think of some work I'm doing with an organization right now, all of our donors have really upped their giving, and it's like in this year and last year, this year, and the year after, they're all becoming empty nesters, this certain group, right? So all of a sudden, their habits and their giving has changed significantly. The other thing that I've always, back when I was at a university, like the other thing, and you guys have probably experienced this if you have a degree from any higher education institution, is they hit you up the moment before you graduate even, right? Because they want you to get in the habit of giving. You're making that transition, putting all the pieces together, right? Like it's a big transition in your life. You have that peak, but also it's early. And if they do it right, they can get your lifetime support. Very clever universities.
Yeah, absolutely. So interesting. Even so, like, you know, Ed noting that they try to send their appeals, you know, for a major event in the summer. I mean, even the summer is a time of where habits get thrown completely out the window, right? So Ed, maybe it's about looking at like, okay, well, at what point in the summer are we sending it, like in July when sort of summer routines have kind of settled in, or do we want to send it closer to when schools just get out or when schools are just about to go back in? I mean, I think traditionally we tend to stay away from those times in terms of communication because we think, oh, you know, people are going to be really busy.
Yeah.
But in fact, like that busyness creates mindfulness, right? And that's what creates the possibility for actually adopting new behaviors.
Yeah. And it's so interesting. Here's a test for anyone who is so inclined. We always do year-end giving. We know statistically people are more quote unquote generous, so they give more at that time of year. But we also, you know, New Year's is definitely a time of year when people are trying to create new habits. So I wonder if there's any research there around New Year asks.
That's a really interesting idea.
Let's maybe try it with someone.
Yeah.
And family gratitude and attachment for the services you provided them for sure is a huge, that emotional connection. So that's like, I don't know, is it fair to say that that's a habit too? Like you develop this core connection with something, like it's indelible in your brain.
Yeah, I'm not sure if that's a habit as much as it is just that sort of like emotional driven connection, that sense of like of the person that you love and wanting to support them. Yeah, I think it's even bigger than habit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, monthly giving is obviously a great way to leverage habits of your donors.
Absolutely.
And we actually did a whole session on monthly giving. So hold on, I'm going to find it and add the link for those who weren't able to join while you talking.
So interesting around monthly giving because for the most part, your work is done, right? They've put their credit card information in, off they go. It's not even a habit. Nobody thinks about it. Not you, not the organization, not the donor, right? It's money that's coming in. Now, it's you know, in the best case scenario, you've managed to automate some communication processes that you know, that make sure that $10 a month donor continues to give, right? But what happens when their credit card expires, right? Like so if you think about it in terms of, you know, a credit card expiry date, you maybe have like a couple of years of knowing that you don't necessarily have to check back in, especially if you're dealing with volume and with sort of low value donors. So then the question becomes like, are there systems that can make sure that you're being notified when those credit cards are coming to the end of their term, and then you can actually, again, as in terms of it being, you know, a moment of very slight transition, use it as an opportunity to re-engage that donor and to up the ante, so to speak.
Yeah. But what I also love is that with monthly giving, there's the opportunity to reward your donors again and again and again without them having to think about it or like do that cue. So you're rewarding them for being passive, right? So
that's right.
Donor updates, thank yous, all those things. If you're doing a monthly giving program well, they don't just drop off the face of the earth. You're giving them, because people feel good when they give, and they feel good when they're acknowledged, and they feel good that those are all rewards when they feel like they're having an impact, especially the impact that they wanted to have when they gave.
Yeah.
And so if you could think of like, you know, your monthly, they make the donation, you reward them right away, but then you like keep rewarding them.
Yeah.
they get into a place where like it's a no-brainer to give you their credit card or increase their debt a little because you've banked up all these rewards,
all this goodwill. So a question, and for everybody, and it's a genuine question, I don't have the answer to it. Like where do you think is the most important place to intervene on the habit loop? Is it more at the cue side or at the reward side, and which do you think would sort of generate a better effect in terms of donation? Ideally you don't have to choose, right? And I know we don't have to choose, but like if we're picking one thing to focus on, do you want to focus more on like on making the cue stronger and more individualized, or do you want to think about the reward? So genuine question. What do you think?
I know what I think. It's not my thought, but I guess Simone Joya would argue same as Aine, rewards. So based on the research that she did a number of years ago, God, it was one of the first things I learned in fundraising back in the day, was that, those rewards, immediately when someone makes a donation, will increase the likelihood of them giving again and giving more frequently by almost 40%.
Interesting.
Pretty significant. And one of the things we do, as but for the sake of everyone else, when we start working with an organization, their stewardship structure is one of the first things we tackle, because there's this revolving door that happens. I don't know, have any of you experienced that revolving door where you get all these first-time donations either at an event or like through some introduction through your volunteers, and especially major gifts, and then they kind of drop off. And it's like every year you're chasing the same contributions, or not the same ones, new ones. It's like right. in and out, new, gone. Yeah. Attrition is so high. Renewals are low. Yeah. What's everyone else's experience with that?
So I fully hear what you're saying. I'm gonna play devil's advocate for a second and play the cue card, because as you may have heard and just listening to the news, there were some horrible chemical attacks that happened in Syria in the last couple of weeks, and I subscribe to the Syria campaign and White Helmets newsletters, and they yesterday both sent out like such beautiful, urgent appeals, very much tied to a very specific thing that's very top of mind for anybody who's sort of following, the story of Syria, right? So, so that was like a really powerful, well-timed cue, and I think that a cue when it's really thoughtful and it's tied to something that's already happening in the donor's mind, is incredibly powerful. And maybe to your point, Cindy, it'll pull somebody in who hasn't donated in the past, and that's when the reward comes into play, right? In terms of the effectiveness.
Yeah, I definitely, so I agree with you, but I would say that they're both super important from a habit perspective, but there aren't these crises every day. And so it was leveraging something that was meaningful and urgent to the organization. You're going to give again because of the stewardship. You're going to create that habit of giving because of the rewards.
Yeah.
But
I think so.
As an organization, I think everyone is, it's tough, right? And this goes back to our own habits of what are we going to change first, right? I can list a bazillion things I want to change about our company. And I've always felt that way when I worked in organizations. Where do you start? And these are very specific investments of your time and energy that can hopefully save more time and energy and make it a little bit easier as you form those habits. But stewardship has always been one that I just feel is easy to get in the habit of, and has a really high return. And I know that for organizations that are small, easy and high return, good combination.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And you're right. Like when stewardship is done well, you keep people sort of working around that habit loop. I guess, some like some of the disruptions facing like, fundraising the nonprofit sector have to do with, a generation that doesn't necessarily have established patterns or habits around giving. So in the same way that, the toothpaste industry had to create this cue, and sort of manufacture this notion of reward in order to get people into this habit, like I wonder, like, if any of you have started to think about, like, how do you get sort of a younger generation into a habit of donating, and what are some of the cues or the rewards? How do we have to maybe sort of get even better at using cues and rewards to create habits around a generation that doesn't seem to necessarily buy into habit forming donation activity?
That is a loaded question.
I know, it's so big. I'm sorry. Sometimes
but no.
as
a parent, I think about that all the time. I know there are a couple of other people on the call who are also parents. Hi, Dominica. Where actually next week's blog post, I don't know if you've read it yet, is on that. It's how do we teach or pass on the values of philanthropy. And I think the insight around cue and reward are really important. So we do, for the kids' birthdays, we do these give and get type events where instead of everyone buying a gift, they're invited to make a general contribution to the pool of funds. Half we give to a charity that we pick with our kids, and the other half goes to buy one more significant gift for them. Because for me, it's like this, it's not just the sort of philanthropic, I said that in a weird way, philanthropic piece of it. It's actually also this idea that it's not all like want all the things, right? And I definitely see with my kids, like they are never satisfied. They want more and more. And and so the blog post next week is there's a Canadian website for any Canadians in the house that makes it super easy to do that, called Wish and Give. And I don't get any benefit from promoting it, just as a disclaimer, but I think that like starting early on is, for me, given my age and stage, very important. Yeah. But I also think there's the whole, the teens right now and what they're doing. But, and I think we've talked about this before, they're changing philanthropy too, right? Like they're giving in different ways. And I think actually today there's a big report that came out, I haven't read it yet, from, is it the Rideau Foundation? From the former Governor General or anyway.
Oh, okay. Yeah. From the Rideau Foundation. Yeah.
There's like 30 years, I think, of looking at giving. And although I haven't read this report, from other reports I've seen, people are reporting that younger generations are giving less. But I think they're giving in different ways that we're not measuring yet.
I fully agree. There was a study done by Achieve and the Case Foundation. I think, this must be about 7 or 8 years ago now, and they gave $100 to each of these kids who were, like 21, 22. And told them, give it away. You have to, you can't buy stuff with this $100. You have to give it away to causes. They came back in a year later and they asked them, what happened to the $100? And a lot of them had kind of lost track of it. They knew that they'd given it away, but it's like they had only made like 1 or 2 actual sort of like donations, tax receipted. The rest had either gone to like a friend who was asking for money for an organization they volunteered for, or through a peer-to-peer campaign. They'd given something to Kickstarter, they'd given something to a GoFundMe campaign, right? So they're not motivated by tax receipts. They're motivated by being queued up at the right time by the right person, right? So, and there was the same people published a report around sort of an updated report around millennial giving, and like talked about how apps that are allowing young people to give like $2, $4, and $5 are actually they're picking up a ton of steam. Because,
and that's habit. That's a habit right there, right?
Using apps, using your phone, like less than 3 clicks. I don't care about the receipt, but I want to get this this nice feeling. I want to be part of that community. I want to get this, this nice message back. I want to unlock whatever badge or, that giving, within that app does. Like it needs to feel fun and great. And I realize it's, as I talk about this and as I think about this and read about this, to some extent, I feel that we're taking ourselves further and further away from, talking about driving the mission forward and what it means to make these impacts. And so it's, it opens up a whole other conversation about, about how we talk about philanthropy, giving, and impact. But for another time.
For another time. I'm speaking of time, I'm mindful of that. I wanted to make sure we had time to answer anyone's questions. So if you have one that we haven't answered yet or that has come to mind, this is definitely more of a sort of high-level discussion around habits compared to what we usually do each month, which is very tactical. But I still think that there's a very significant tactical part of this, even though it feels very philosophical, which is like you can do this right now and change your habits and make your life easier. Now that sounds a little woo-woo, but
no, but definitely, Cindy. I mean, like even, I would love to see an organization, surveying their donors, asking specifically about their habits.
Yeah.
And starting to understand where they can actually, where they can actually intervene on that habit loop to either create a new ask or reinvigorate a sort of stale lead or whatever.
Yeah. So we have a question about a company that would set up an app for small donations and how do you get started? So the one thing before you answer that, one thing I will say that we always say is first get to know your donors. So are your donors already on their phones? I don't always, it's very hard to get people to engage with something without mass, without that audience already in place. So find out where your donors are, what they're already, again, tapping into their existing habits and then enhancing those before you start to create new tools or asking them to create a new habit that's disconnected with their existing habits.
That's right.
I would say, are there any existing platforms that, I don't know of any, but do you know of any existing platforms where people are that facilitate? I mean, for better for worse, Facebook is going to, already in the States they're doing donations, but.
Yeah. There is an app that someone mentioned to me last week. I'll just have to kind of dig around and look for it, but I will find it.
Okay. And then the top specific habits we'd recommend to transform your fundraising. I'll give mine and give yours.
Yeah, go for it.
Stewardship, donor meetings. That's it. Stewardship and donor meetings. Specifically, thank you calls and donor meetings are my two big ones.
Yeah, I would. I have to second you there. I don't have something different, but what I can add to that is just again, to get really, really specific about, in a 3-week period, what is going to be the habit that you're hoping to shape. So, if you are a procrastinator, set a timer. Do you know what I mean? Give yourself that time to procrastinate and to clean the house and whatever, but give yourself that 1 hour of this is my time where I'm just going to futz around and do a whole bunch of different stuff. But then when that timer goes, I'm ready to make my 3 calls, and then I know that after that I'm going to have, a coffee, or I'm going to, whatever it is that's going to motivate you. But getting really, really specific and really kind of scientific around that cue, routine, reward, and draw them out, take 5 sticky notes and draw out some habit loops. Draw them out now, as they exist right now, so you can see where the bad habits, so if you, for example, someone who's a smoker, right? they want that cigarette. They're thinking about it, and it becomes that's the cue. And then they have that cigarette, and then, you know, the reward is this like feeling of like, so the way that you don't necessarily have to change the cue or the reward, you just have to change the routine in there. So you want something else that's going to give you that feeling of relax, of that deep breath. So maybe it's a walk around the block, or, you know, it's a cookie, or it's a call with a friend, or whatever.
Yeah. So a couple points. I posted a link to our Operation Major Gifts, which is like, if you're feeling stuck behind your desk, sort of step-by-step over 5 days, how to get you meeting your donors, identifying which ones you should meet with and then meeting with them. Heather, totally database, spreadsheet, whatever you need to do to keep track of information. You're preaching to the converted, sister. That's what we're all about. Yeah. And I had another really good point. I forgot it. Accountability buddies. I said this earlier, but I actually think, I was thinking about this actually because we're working on a presentation for AFP Fundraising Day this year about small shop survival. And so both from an accountability perspective and like getting out of the isolation that often comes with being the only person responsible for fundraising in a small organization, finding someone who you can connect with and just check in on each other. Or I saw, I think it was in my Facebook feed, an ad for this program. I'm like, this guy is either a genius or wacko, but basically he was charging like $50 a month, and all that he would do is every day you'd get an automated email sent from his system that says, ask like the 3 same questions. What did you do yesterday? What did you do today? And what do you need? Like, where are you struggling? Something like that. I could be getting those wrong. It just sent out automatically every day, and all you had to do was reply back with an answer. No one replied or responded to your answer. There's no thing. It's just the act of being accountable. Yeah. And I was like, whoa, this guy's like a genius, because if he's getting people to pay like maybe $40 a month for that, I was like, holy. But it really is about, right, that's a routine. That's like staying on top of it, and that's the reward. So finding someone so you're not like in isolation in your fundraising and in trying to change your habits is really good. Like for me, I know running buddies. I like running. I like it a lot more when I have someone to run with. So I would say from like not in terms of impacting your actual fundraising activities, but just in terms of changing your habits, having someone you can share accountability with is really important.
Absolutely. Fully. So any other questions floating around?
We're good. Yeah. Thank you everyone for joining. We'll give you another minute or two. We have about 4 or 5 minutes before we'll sign off, unless everyone else just signs off. But while we're waiting, I just want to thank you all for joining us. We hope you had fun, as we always do. Next month, as I mentioned, my friend Heather will be joining us. She is a corporate fundraising guru and fantastic. And if you don't know more about the Good Partnership, we are a fundraising consultancy that specializes in small nonprofits. So we help focus on your fundraising so you can focus on all the incredible work you're doing to change the world. So if you ever think you might need some help, whether it's coaching or implementation, reach out. I'm here for you. We're here for you. Awesome. Yeah, and please join us next month. And then we're also in the next little while going to be relaunching. If any of you have downloaded our fundraising plan, this is like a stay tuned announcement. We're going to be relaunching the fundraising plan template that we have with a series of videos to help you really fill it out and make the most out of it. So we'll be announcing that in the next month, and like step by step helping you write your fundraising plan, which talking about habits and routine, having a clear outline of what you need to do goes a long way in getting it done. So there we go. All right. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much. Cindy, thanks for chatting with me.
Thanks as always. It was fun. Bye, guys.
Bye, everybody.